Welcome, everyone. Perfection Learning is excited to have each of you joining us for tonight's webinar, Architecture, Design, and Structure in Literature. It is my pleasure to introduce our expert and teacher for this evening, Dr. Brandon Abdon. Brandon comes to us with over 20 years of experience in the classroom, including 12 years as a high school English teacher, many years as a professor of English and education, and time as a curriculum developer and instructional coach. In addition to his time in the classroom, Brandon has more than 10 years of experience as a consultant and formerly worked as the lead director for the International Advanced Placement Program at the College Board. Brandon is a collaborator on a number of projects to support English teachers and their classrooms. This includes the Mosaic Slow Conference Project and the Garden of English. But our favorite credential on Brandon's resume is as senior author of Perfection Learning's AP Literature and AP Language course books by AMSCO. For all participants tonight, Perfection Learning will send out an email tomorrow with a recording of the webinar. As you have questions tonight, please be sure to post them in the chat or the Q&A section on your screen. Brandon, thank you so much for being here to share your knowledge, and I'm going to pass the presentation off to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. I appreciate it. And thank you all for being here. I got lots of emails and messages from people who wanted to come. But they were citing just how busy schools get this time of the year in February, and I completely understand that too. So thank you all for those of you who could be here. I think you're really going to have some fun tonight, the way we're going to kind of nerd out with some literature, some poetry, some prose, and so on. So thanks again for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. So you should be able to see the title slide right now. And my colleagues will be sharing some links and things with you from this as we work through. Because if you've been to one of my sessions before, you've been to my APSI sessions, you know I really like participation. And so there'll be some opportunities for you to manipulate some texts and play around with some things tonight, just like we would ask students to do. So I like to start out with these just imagine scenarios, just to get us thinking about what we're doing here. And so Ernest Hemingway, once famously said that prose is architecture, it's not interior design. And if we think about what that means, about how prose is the structure, it's not what happens inside the text. We might think about Hemingway and say, yeah, I get that with what Hemingway is saying. As I say here, known for his sparsity, the tight structure of his prose, anecdotally spending hours on one sentence only to throw it away, the idea of killing your darlings. This won't be a surprise to us to think that Hemingway feels this way, but there are a number of other writers, and I would argue readers, who would no doubt argue with this. Think about the texts of Toni Morrison, and how much of that is what Hemingway might consider interior design. Where would most poems be without both the aesthetics of both architecture and interior design? I have a typo there, sorry. Without carefully placed images or artfully extended comparisons, then what would be the prose of Alice Walker or the soliloquies of Shakespeare? What would those things be? So the structures of and within literature create and define it. Duh. I'm talking to people who already know this. But it's easy to gloss over this with our kids. Sonnets have 14 lines. Okay, why? Metaphysicals have conceits. Okay, why? Graham Greene built paragraphs. Hemingway crafted sentences, and so on and so forth. But it's really not that sexy to spend time talking about the way a paragraph is put together, the way a sentence is put together. And so I want to spend some time today looking at how we can help students manipulate texts, or look at how authors have manipulated the things that they're doing in a text, so that as they start to analyze what we often think are the really interesting bits, images, similes, metaphors, description. We look at the way those things are put together too, thinking about the structure and order of those things. Now, there's certainly no way I could go into all of this. I could do an entire course, an entire seminar, a week-long seminar, an entire semester course on stylistics in prose or stylistics in poetry, or a combination of the two, because they should be taught together. But the whole point here is that these things often get neglected when we study literature. They're hard to teach, they're hard to learn. So our big idea, if we think about the AP literature and composition course and exam description from the College Board, that big 3-ring binder or the huge PDF, whatever version you often reference is, our big idea is structure, as you well know. And I want to take a moment to think about this enduring understanding, because this enduring understanding is the statement that the people who helped put together that binder, I was managing that work, but there were lots of brilliant professors and teachers from around the country who were contributing to these ideas. What these creators felt was necessary for students to remember 20 or 30 years down the road, what was supposed to endure for them outside of our class. Maybe not for English majors, maybe for English majors. And that's where you get this enduring understanding. The arrangement of the parts and sections of a text, the relationship of the parts to each other, and the sequence in which the text reveals information are all structural choices made by a writer that contribute to the reader's interpretation of a text. Wow, what a mouthful, I know. But we teach all the skills that are related to this to get students hopefully to an understanding of structure. So you see the things, I kind of break it down here. I have plot, paragraphs, stanzas, sentences, and lines. Those are really the things with which we're dealing here. Yes, punctuation matters, but it works in there with sentences and paragraphs. All right. Yes, the order of paragraphs matters, but that fits with paragraphs themselves. But you'll notice I have plot a different color, and we'll come back to that here in just a moment. So here I have a very simple little table where I've organized these elements of structure. And it's not just the elements of structure from the course and exam description. It's the elements of structure the way that they're often talked about in literary analysis. When we think about books that talk about novels, that break down poetry, and we're looking at other scholars who are analyzing these things, they often talk about it like this. So we have the techniques in structure. We see plot, you see paragraphs and stanzas, you see sentences and lines. These are together. Again, I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. Most of you are English majors. You think, oh yeah, I get this, I get it. Cool. These things are breaking down so that you can think about how to chunk these things for your students so that they can chew on it. I mean, you can't eat the elephant one big bite. Okay, we got to chunk it, we got to chew on it, and then we got to come back and review it. Chunk, chew, review. And then the question that gets us to analysis: how do these techniques create or illustrate the following? And here's the effects. Contrasts the events in a plot and the conflicts. So there are specific skills in the course and exam description that tie to all of these things. You may know this, but having spent time digging into it, you may not. I don't want to talk about plot right now because plot is really focusing on narrative. That's a different discussion, a different night. What's important to remember, though, is that plot is an element of structure. The way that things happen in a text affects the way that you read it. So the order of those things. And this was a lot of back and forth discussion when this was being developed, when people realized this, that it falls under structure. Okay, but we're not going to focus on plot events so much tonight. We are going to focus on these units of structure: paragraphs, stanzas, lines, sentences. We'll talk about the effects of them 2. You know, why does all this matter? All right. So here's where I'm going to ask you to find that chat. And I know there aren't a ton of us here tonight. That's fine. I'm going to ask you to find the chat. And I'd like you to go ahead and tell me, what is a sentence? What do you think a sentence? Oh, I love it. And I love the immediate responses that I've got. I swear to you, not 5 years ago, I would ask this question to a room full of teachers. And I would start getting the grammar definition. But I love it. Yes. A sentence is a complete thought. Yes. Great. We're taught that in elementary school, or we teach that to kids early on, but somehow it gets lost. Somewhere along the way, it becomes a grammatical construction. And Grace, I love the fact that you went on and said it's a selection of carefully selected words. We would like to think that for our students. So, okay. Well, let me ask you now, what is a paragraph? Go ahead and drop in the chat. What is a paragraph? Yeah, you all are starting to see the pattern developing here, a collection of thoughts, an idea or a partial idea. Yeah, connected thoughts, Leah, that hopefully, you know, relate to some sort of idea, as Leah says there. Tuan, I see, and Tuan, I'm glad you're here. I see you as with an arranged collection of sentences that cohere and create a communal meaning. Fantastic. Yeah, great. So a collection of thoughts. And it's important to remember these things because kids have lost this in many ways by the time they get to high school or by the time they get to AP. Not in all cases, just depending on the teachers who are teaching before you. But thinking about the teaching of sentences as units of thought and paragraphs as collections of those things makes it much more interesting, much more effective to write and to read those things. Again, I'm probably not telling you anything you already know. This is just review in a lot of cases. We'll come to some practice here in just a moment. I would say the same thing with a stanza. The stanza is a collection of units of meaning, an idea, a poegram paragraph, as Andrea says. Yeah, I like it, Andrea. You see where I'm going. So I have line last here because I like this idea that a line is a unit of meaning in a poem, but it's important to remember that it's also usually part of a sentence. Because the number one comprehension strategy for poetry for students is to read the sentences first and then go back. I also like the idea that I learned when I was in graduate school, a great little book by a guy named James Longenbach called The Art of the Line, The Art of the Poetic Line. And he said it so clearly and so simply that the only difference between prose and poetry is the line. Think about that for a moment. The only difference between prose and poetry is the line. And we'll play around with that here in just a moment. Okay, so here's a basic sentence. I'd like you, as a student, try not to be an English major right now or an English teacher right now. As a student, what's the first thing you notice? The first thing that this sentence tells you that stands out to you, that sticks out to you? If you read this sentence, what did it tell you? Drop it in the chat. I'm not asking you to analyze it, just the first thing that says extremity. Yeah, extremity, consistently strong responses. Oh yeah, I like that. Great. Yeah, thank you, Holly. It is Frankenstein, but do something different, Holly. Thank you. But you're right. Right. Okay. Knows what he wants and pursues those passions. You see passion, you see drive. Yeah, the words vehement, violent, all of that. Right. Right. So you might have noticed this, a string of thoughts, as Andrea says. Right? There's multiple sentences here, multiple independent clauses that have been joined Kids don't have to know all those names. They don't have, but it's nice if they know the difference between a dependent independent clause, because not because of the grammatical issue, but because of the relationship of ideas. Okay. And some of you might have noticed it this way too. Now, this third example I have down here, what am I calling out? What am I signaling for kids? A shift, right? And so the things that are a contrast, Andrea. So we see my temper was violent, sometimes violent, my passion's vehement, but by some law in my temperature, they were turned not towards childish pursuits, but to an eager desire to learn. All right. So this idea of what I call and have heard called by other people juicy sentences, and the idea that you can squeeze a lot out of them and spend almost an entire class period on just one sentence. If we are introducing Frankenstein and we're getting to know a character, imagine squeezing the juice before they even start the story, squeezing the juice out of this sentence to get to know that character. So it serves a purpose of studying the text, but also serves a purpose of better understanding how a single sentence can be mined for analysis. Now, we could keep going with this, breaking down these words, okay? The key thing I like to remind students is that wherever there's a shift, the most important part's probably after it. So even though the violence and the passion stood out to you, that's not the purpose of the sentence. The purpose is to show that those things were used to learn, not as a childish pursuits. All right, let's move on now and play with Frankenstein a little bit more. I'd like you to take just a moment and read this paragraph. Sorry, these two paragraphs in this order on your own. All right. Now I'd like you to read these paragraphs again. You think, oh, I just read that. Please read them again. Now, very simple question. And if you've read the novel, or you know the novel, or you teach the novel, you may know. Very simple question. Which one do you like better? The first one or the second one? As a reader, which one do you like better? And after you've decided, give me just a brief explanation why you like it. Try to give me 6 or 7 words as to why you like that one better. Just 6 or 7 words. I'm not looking for full analysis. I like that we already have some teachers. One likes the first one better, one likes the second one better. Okay. All right. All right. Grace, I want you to tell me, when you say it flows better, what about it flows better? Take another 30 seconds or so. Andrea, would it surprise you to know that these paragraphs do fit together in the context? They are the same person talking. All right. So the point I want to show you here is, and I will tell you which one in just a moment, because I know you want to know. But the point to show you here is spending time with students and the order of paragraphs. Actually taking paragraphs, I used to do it physically and cut them up, but you might do it digitally. It's much easier. putting them on PowerPoint slides, etc. Each paragraph on a different PowerPoint slide or Google slide, and you can move them around and have students try to order them. But the effect of them, and that's fine, Andrea, it happens all the time because it's hard to believe that there's such a significant shift. Andrea, I'm glad you said this. There's such a significant shift between what's being discussed. So Charlene says the second one, because it shows his peculiarity and then explains that he shouldn't have been peculiar, right? There's a contrast. My temper was sometimes violent. No human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. Look at the contrasts there. Versus the first one where no human being could have passed a happier childhood than myself. I distinctly discerned how peculiarly fortunate my lot was. My gratitude assisted the development of filial love. This all seems so positive and happy. Bam, my temper was sometimes violent. Okay. And so it's interesting to help students recognize those shifts. There's still a shift here, isn't there? But we don't see that but. All right, and I'm going to make sure I see all the other chats here. Yes, I agree, Andrea. Charlene's explanation makes a lot of sense. So just so you all know, the original text is the left one. All right, but think about doing this sort of thing. Think about the time you could spend with students unpacking this. And this is often something that's overlooked for the sake of the plot itself, for the sake of what's happening in the story. Not always, but often. Okay, let's move on now. Here's a poem that you may recognize. This is an excerpt from it. Naomi Sheob, A Valentine for Ernest. Man, I first encountered this when I was doing the National Writing Project almost 2 decades ago now, in a book by Georgia Hurd. And this poem has stuck with me ever since. I just cannot overcome the beauty of this. And it is in the professional learning textbook that I was able to work on. And I'll read it. Once I knew a man who gave his wife 2 skunks for a Valentine. He couldn't understand why she was crying. I thought they had such beautiful eyes. And he was serious. He was a serious man who lived in a serious way. Nothing was ugly just because the world said so. He really liked those skunks. So he reinvented them as Valentines, and they became beautiful, at least to him. And the poems that had been hiding in the eyes of skunks for centuries crawled out and curled up at his feet. Now, this poem kind of makes me teary every time I read it. I just love it. It's just so unique and so passionate and so beautiful. But that's enough about me. I talked earlier about the line. And the number one thing that students struggle with is not comprehending poetry as a collection of ideas first, and then going back and looking at the line as a unit of meaning. So some of you may be familiar with this, some of you may not, but a very simple way to help students get more comfortable with poetry is to provide it as prose, which I've done here. Now, the next step with this may be to take a poem that does not have traditional prose, that does not have traditional sentences or punctuation, and ask students to put it into prose and punctuate it. I find that is more a lesson on punctuation and how punctuation contributes to meaning than I do on breaking things down. But the next step for this would then be for students to highlight in different colors the lines as they are in the sentences, so that they can begin to think about, okay, I see this first sentence. Once I knew a man who gave his wife 2 skunks for a Valentine. But why does this writer break it down to once I knew a man who gave his wife? Well, think about that. I'd like to hear from you all. Why does the writer break this sentence down into 2 different lines, as we see here? I'd like to hear from y'all. Yeah. Thank you, Grace. We're not expecting skunks. Okay. Once I knew a man who gave his wife something, right, Andrea, something was given. And then the second line emphasizes 2 skunks for a Valentine. It's that element of surprise. It's a shift. It's a contrast again. And then we can look at later on, maybe, why does the author decide to put, and he was serious, he was a serious man, and then break up who lived in a serious way. We could continue to break these things down. And what we're looking at there is not a metaphor or an image or a literary device. We're looking at a structural technique and asking, how does this, why do you think the author did this? Okay. Yes, Leah, immediately questioning why. Okay. So now I think we're going to go play a little bit. Here is a single paragraph from Mohsen Hamid's Exit West, one of my favorite books of the last probably decade. And it's a book I recommend to lots of people who are looking for something that is a little shorter, a little browner, and a little more contemporary to include in their AP literature classroom. It's a great read, beautiful book. And yeah, we excerpt this heavily in unit 6, of the textbook. So take a moment and read this paragraph. Actually, for sake of time, I'll read it aloud. The art in Nadia's childhood home consisted of religious verses and photos of holy sites framed and mounted on walls. Nadia's mother and sister were quiet women, and her father a man who tried to be quiet, thinking this a virtue, but who nonetheless came to boil easily and often where Nadia was concerned. Her constant questioning and growing irreverence in matters of faith upset and frightened him. There was no physical violence in Nadia's home and much giving to charity. But when, after finishing university, Nadia announced, to her family's utter horror, to her own surprise, for she had not planned to say it, that she was moving out on her own, an unmarried woman, the break involved hard words on all sides, from her father, from her mother, even more so from her sister, and perhaps most of all from Nadia herself, such that Nadia and her family both considered her thereafter to be without a family, something all of them, all four, for the rest of their lives regretted, but which none of them would ever act to repair, partly out of stubbornness, partly out of bafflement in how to go about doing so, and partly because the impending descent of their city into the abyss would come before they realized that they had lost the chance. All right. Excellent book. I recommend the entire thing, like I said. But I think you can see what I've done over here. I've reversed it, what we talked about earlier, and I've taken the prose and I've used lines to emphasize certain things. Now, this isn't so much about the act of creating a poem. This is helping students to recognize the line as a unit of meaning again. So if we could go ahead, I'll ask one of my colleagues to drop the link to our Jamboard in there so that all of you all can join us there. Let me back out of this and I'll go over to that Jamboard myself. And you can see, everyone should be able to just click on that link in the chat and join the Jamboard. I want to make sure here. Yep, everyone should be able to join. Fantastic. Thank you to my Perfection Learning colleagues for dropping that in. And you should be able to see on the first page where I have broken things down. Okay. So what I'd like to do is ask you all, if you look on page 2 of the Jamboard, if you want to look at what I'm sharing on my screen, I know you're going back and forth a lot. I apologize. Look at what I'm sharing on my screen, just in case you aren't familiar with Jamboard. I'll show you that up at the top of the page here, you can navigate across to different slides. All right. And so what I'm going to ask you all to do is to pick one of the slides, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Let's just do one of those, 2, 3, 4, or 5. Pick one, go there, and you can click inside of it and start to break things up yourself. And we're probably not going to be able to finish it all, but I want you all to get to manipulate the text a little bit. Go for it. You may end up on the same slide with a colleague, and that's perfectly fine. You should be able to double click inside of the box and move the text around. I have stopped sharing my screen for just a moment. All right, some of you may be having trouble manipulating in here. I haven't gotten any notes about it. Or some of you may just be in a spot where you can't participate and manipulate, and that's fine too. I just wanted to give an opportunity to play around with this a little bit. So I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint right now and ask you all to join me there. And I am presenting my screen again. It's really important when you do this with students. If you've done it before, you may know this already. If you've done it before and it hasn't worked for you, then what I'm about to say next is really important. It's really important that you model it for them. And I'm not saying necessarily give them one you've done, but let them see you walking through it and thinking through it as you do it. That modeling is so important. Sometimes we feel like we have to go in and have everything ready to go to give the students so they have a model. What that sometimes sends to the students is the message that we don't struggle, or we don't think, we don't have to second guess ourselves and revise things. And that's such an important lesson for them to learn. So if they see us thinking through our decisions and explaining why I decided to, let me grab my pointer here, why I decided to double tab framed and mounted on the walls under photos of holy sites, then it shows them that I've got some real intentionality in my decisions, and will actually help them in reverse when they go to make their own decisions and to analyze others' decisions. You'll note that I intentionally break the stanza at but here, and I capitalize this but and do it in the middle of a sentence. And I would talk to the students about why I did that. And then let them see it and then go try it either with the same one or with one of their own. Okay, we'll move on from here. And here's another example. And this is even more fun. So I encourage each of you to go to the Jamboard right now. And I have a slide for each of you if you want to do it. And we'll spend more time on this because this is a really fun activity. Starting on slide 7 of that Jamboard, you can grab these and move them around. These are individual lines of an actual poem. And if you know the poem, good for you, don't cheat. So I'm going to give each of you a slide number because there should be enough slides here for everyone who's in the room. So Andrea, you're number 7. Charlene, you're number 8. Grace, you're number 9. Holly, you're number 10. Hugh, you're 11. Karen, you're 12. Kathy, you're 13. Leah, you're 14. Melinda, you're 15. Go for it. Move those lines around and try to recreate the poem. And if you know the poem, don't cheat. Oh, I love it. I'm seeing the person who is organizing theirs as a staircase. I don't know who you are, but I appreciate what you're doing. Let's take another minute or so. I will be showing you the actual poem, so you won't be frustrated by not knowing what it was really supposed to be. Okay, everyone. I'm going to ask you to kind of come to a stopping point. I know how difficult that will be for many of you because you think you're like, I'm almost there, almost got it. So just take another couple of seconds. Awesome, awesome, awesome work, everyone. Thank you. And just like for all the best lessons, we run out of time a little bit. So I want to make sure that we have enough time here at the end. I'm going to start sharing my screen again. All right. And here you'll see the actual poem. I'll give you guys just a moment to scan that. I know you're going to want to go back and forth between yours and that one. Don't change yours. Own it. It's not about getting it right. Okay. Now that you've seen the irregular, I'd like you to take some time maybe looking at the Jamboard, or you can look with me and see what some of your colleagues did, because I'm showing it. I'm starting with the first one here. You can see what some of your colleagues have done. Just taking a moment and scanning what other people have done here. All right. So I'm gonna ask some questions here about some of the decisions made, just like I would students in a classroom. And if you want to come off mute and speak about it, I invite you to. What you will need to do is find the reactions button that allows you to raise your hand. And when you raise your hand, you'll pop up right to the top of the list, and me or my colleagues can unmute you. So I'd really like to hear from the person who did number 8 and placed bear right after the hyphen of floor.
So that was me.
Go for it, Charlene. Tell us what you were thinking there, because I really like what you've done. I just want to hear the reasoning behind it.
I was just thinking about their journey. I just imagined someone going up the stairs, and I was thinking about how they might find the stairs in this sort of like increasingly depreciating state. So it just seemed like, initially it's a little uncomfortable to walk on, and then the boards are messed up, and then there's absolutely no carpet. So bare felt like something that needed to be offset by itself to really just emphasize the situation of the stairs. And of course the dark came after just because it was like an additional sort of negative, but it wasn't really related to the stairs. So
yeah. So and what I was immediately seeing was similar to what you just described. And I love this because it shows, you just explained your intention, but sometimes your intention doesn't matter. It's what the reader sees too. Because I was seeing the conditions of the stairs. I think along with what you were saying, they're torn up, they're splintered, there's no carpet on the floor, they're bare. And then thinking about emptiness along with darkness and seeing those things together, and then emphasize, where there ain't been no light. And I really thought that was an interesting way of putting those things together, almost as effective as the original. So thank you, Charlene. I appreciate you participating with that. Let's hear from, I want to hear from this person here. I'd like to hear from more of you, but for sake of time, we cannot. Who was it that did the backward stare here? Because I have a feeling I see what you're trying to do, but I want to make sure I'm not overthinking it. Who was this? Just find that reaction and on the Zoom menu and click raise hand. Melinda, okay, Melinda, if you don't want to come off mute, that is totally fine. So you're saying you're just being visual. Okay, I want to give you more credit than you're giving yourself, because I see it down then I thought maybe you, because of the direction you went. Okay, Melinda, go ahead, come off mute, Melinda. Talk to us.
Okay. I'm familiar with the poem, all right, to start with, but it's just what hit me. It was just to make, since I got a chance to play with it, and I had him start at the bottom so that she's climbing up.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yep. Quite, as you can see, I was kind of ran out of time there, and the top one wasn't a room to stick it over there, but it's the climbing.
Yeah. So Melinda, thank you for coming off mute. And I love the idea that you're excited about getting to play with it, even though it's something you're familiar with. You know, we could do this with students with poems that they know. And like I said to Leah, when Leah commented earlier, you know, the students get to almost feel like they're some of the creators of the literature. So Leah, I'm going to ask you to come off mute. So colleagues, if we can take Leah Ames off mute or let her speak. And thank you, Melinda, again. Because Leah says it creates a very interesting thought pattern. I want you to say more, Leah. And then Grace, you're next. Leah?
Okay, I was actually asking someone to mute the TV, so I
get it.
Here. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great, yep.
Okay, what was your question again, Brandon?
Sorry. You said it creates a very interesting thought pattern, and I simply want you to say more.
Yes, and I was actually just typing some thoughts in the chat. It really, by taking it from the bottom and moving up, it feels like you're climbing those stairs, like you're physically working through the obstacles to get up the stairs instead of just reading from the top down. The structure of it, the display of it pairs with what you're trying to create with the imagery.
Mm-hmm. All right. Yeah. Thank you for that, Leah. And thank you to whomever it was that that muted the TV for you. Grace, go ahead. Grace, I'm asking you to expand more on what you say about the brilliant structure.
Sorry, I didn't realize I was muted.
You're fine.
Okay. Yeah, so I was just saying, it never occurred to me to arrange it from the bottom going up. And I think it's amazing. I think, you know, if you model it for the students like this, it just shows them a possibility of how the structure really lends to the meaning. And the previous speaker, I didn't catch their name, but saying it feels like you're climbing the stairs. I agree with that. It's like you feel the struggle. You experience the struggle with the speaker.
Yeah. I think it's fantastic to show students how they could do this, maybe specifically to this poem, but also with other poems too, because they could create the visual here. One thing that I noticed, and maybe I'm reading too far into it, I do that sometimes. We all do, right? Is I see that I could almost read it both directions. And I don't know that that was intended, but it's something you could certainly play around with and see going up the stairs, going down the stairs. It makes more sense knowing the poem like we do to start it from the bottom and read up, which is by itself beautiful. Okay. So there's lots of really cool things we could do with this, and we could keep going on, but I do want to wrap things up for a moment or quickly here. I'm going to ask a general question, and I want all of you to think about this and drop your response to this in the chat, please. And here's, I clicked on the link. Here's the question. How did or do any of the activities we did or reviewed make you think about structure or make you think differently about structure? Not just did you like the activity, but how does it make you think or think differently about structure? Take a moment and drop that response in the chat, please. Yeah, I see some responses coming in. Take a moment and scan your colleagues' responses, please. So Holly, I like your comment. I do want to say more about that here in just a moment. I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to comment here. Right. So I want to address what Holly says, because I think it's really important. I mean, the goal of the origin of poetry was the oral tradition. Things are easier to remember in meter. They're easier to remember with rhyme. And that's, I mean, that's just what we know. So hearing poetry is vital. And I used to tell my own students, and I tell my college students to this day, that when they read a poem, they need to read it aloud. And so even on the AP exam, I'll tell my students to, mouth the poem to themselves aloud. So they're feeling or maybe hearing the alliteration, the sounds of words that are put together. They're feeling the mouthing of the rhyme and so on. That does matter. And we know that those things are important in poetry. So seeing it visually, as she says, it's almost not quite fair. I don't know that I would go that far to say it's not quite fair, because there have been so many people who've played with the visual form of poetry on the page. The example we saw today is a great point there. But I think what Holly says is very important, and we don't want to lose that and the importance of sound devices in poetry. So we're focusing on structure here, but then the next kind of discussion could be sound devices that are also in the course and exam description. Alliteration, I mentioned, rhyme, meter, patterns, and so on. So thank you, Holly, for bringing that up. I think it's something we certainly don't want to ignore that just for the sake of structure. So, yeah, so what Leah says here, we can speak about structure, but we can speak about structure, but allowing our students to discover through strategies like this produces amazing results. That's the key. When kids start to see the importance of breaking a piece of prose to emphasize those two words on one line, or they start to see the importance of moving the lines of a poem around so that this line comes here, then they begin to see the importance of structure in poetry and in prose. When you look at an example like we looked at with Frankenstein, where they're moving paragraphs, or you move paragraphs, and they don't know it, then they begin to see, oh, when I analyze that passage that College Board gives me, it's important that I learn this piece of information in this prose passage before I learn this, and why. But as an extension, not to just make it about the exam, when they're reading any text, they notice a piece of information they're told in a paragraph, like, why am I told this? Oh, now I see. And it helps them be critical consumers of text, but also critical consumers of aesthetics and the things around them. So just as a reminder here, what's this all about? None of this matters unless we can unless we can demonstrate how these things relate to the effects, and specifically the contrasts and conflicts, because events is really about narrative. You know, you can have narrative poetry, you can play around with that, right? And so what really matters is that contrast, the conflict. How do we see that? And we're thinking about that shift that we often see. And it may not be an explicit shift with a but or a therefore. It may just be a contrast or conflict of ideas or values that we see. I want to remind you that as teachers, we are all risk takers and mistake makers. I want to thank my friend Andy Schoburn for giving me this quote a while back. And I like to remind teachers of this all the time. And I think it's important that we remind our students of this. Check out my textbooks, shameless plug, but they are very affordable. And we had a blast writing them. I've got some great colleagues, and Perfection Learning has been wonderful with all the support that they've provided. And then finally, I'm going to grab the link and drop this in the chat if anyone's interested or wants to share with their colleagues. We are providing through the Garden of English summer workshops that APSIs that will be virtual. And we even have an evening one in August for people who can't attend all week or all day. Sorry, we'll be doing one in the evenings, and we're going to have, oh, I didn't mean to click the link. We will have special guests. Colin McCann from Apeirogon, National Book Award winner Colin McCann will be appearing. Maybe probably face-to-face. He might have to do a video depending on his travel schedule. And then Sarah Zerwin, her great book, Point Less, will also be attending, and she's fantastic to talk about grading strategies and how to take back some sanity as we manage the paper load a little bit. So thank you all so much. I encourage you to be in touch. Here are my Twitter and Instagram links, and I'll hand it over to Kristen.
Thank you, Brandon, for both your time and your insights this evening. We all greatly appreciated it. It was a lot of fun. As a reminder to all participants tonight, Perfection Learning will be sending out an email tomorrow with the recording of tonight's webinar. And if you want to learn more from Brandon, in addition to the books that he shared, as well as the conferences coming up, please take the time to subscribe to the Next Step blog from Perfection Learning. There you will find recordings of Brandon's past webinars, blog posts, and lesson plans that he has developed. The link to the Next Step blog you can find in the chat. Thank you everyone for joining us this evening, and have a great finish to your week.
Thanks to everyone. Bye-bye.